IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. India is celebrating the 75th anniversary of its independence from British colonial rule. Jawaharlal Nehru's historic and iconic tryst with destiny marked the first step of the newly independent country. The Indian flag, the tricolour with its blue Ashoka Chakra in the middle, was introduced to the people of the country on July the 22nd, 1947, and has since then become embedded in our hearts and minds. But it was not always so. The journey to this flag was through several other iterations over the decades before this vision of the Tiranga was accepted. Our guest today, Arundhati Virmani, has looked at the Indian flag closely, even writing a book about it, titled A National Flag for India, Rituals, Nationalism, and the Politics of Sentiment. The book on the Indian flag is a study on not just the tricolour, but also its history, its design, and the sentiment it generates among all of us. Professor Virmani is a historian teaching at the School for Advanced Studies in Social Sciences in Marseille, France. She has a doctorate in 19th century French history and has also written extensively on India and Indian history. She writes in both French and English. Arundhati Virmani, welcome to the Wire Talks. It's a fascinating subject, the national flag. How and why did you think of writing on it? Was there enough material available?
It's a great question, Sidharth. When I began working on the national flag, it wasn't the hottest topic going around. Surprisingly so, because it's a national symbol, an emblem. You would have thought that historians would have started thinking about it and working on it almost immediately since independence, and all those historians working on colonial history. But it was too official, perhaps, to attract the attention of historians who were interested in popular movements, social struggles, and therefore it remained very much on the margins. And in fact, when I started working on it, it was the peak of the subaltern movement. And a lot of my colleagues and friends told me, yes, you should look up the Constituent Assembly debates, of course, but I wanted to go beyond that. And as far as material is concerned, like the librarian of the South Asian Center at Cambridge University told me, this is a crazy subject. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so it was not considered a subject which could make a book, you know. It was okay to think about and write a short chapter. So it was a challenging journey. It made me delve into many, many different kinds of archive sources, from memoirs, autobiographies, biographies, official papers, private papers, political accounts, newspapers, and letters to the editor in various many journals. But it was exciting because it was really opening up a new chapter into the history of India, I think, because the flag was, of course, very much present. It was very visible, and yet it was absent.
Yes, that's a very nice way of putting it, visible and yet absent. When it's so visible, we take it for granted. And we've taken the sentiment certainly for granted. I looked at, parts of your book, and even the bits that I accessed make one, quite honestly, come as a little bit of a shock in the sense of taking this heraldic symbol for granted all our lives, and on 26th January and 15th August going there. And then, as time passes and you grow up and the way the flag is used, you start thinking of it in terms of something that brings tears to your eyes and all those kind of things. It's waved in cricket matches, etc., etc. But all throughout, it remains what I would call a static symbol, a symbol one takes for granted, a symbol that is there and must not be questioned, and which, of course, for a historian is a red rag to the bull, because they will question it. So what I realized that you had questioned some of the aspects of the flag. Would that be correct to say?
Yes, absolutely, Sidharth. As you say, flag is something we take for granted. It's part of the official landscape. And I think growing up in India, we were used to perceiving it on film screens before this film started earlier on, and seeing it appear in official ceremonies and sites of power. Yet this inquiry around the flag, and I must say it was greatly inspired by a French historian, Maurice Agulon, who had initiated very exciting work on the symbol of the French Republic. I did my own PhD thesis with Maurice Agulon, and this work on the flag really inspired a lot from the way French historians were actually thinking about their state symbols, how they were not just imposed from the top, but how they were slowly introduced into the public spaces and from there into the hearts of people, so that political institutions or nations become something really meaningful to ordinary citizens. And it is this relationship that the flag, really instigated for me. How does this relationship develop? Do we just snap our fingers and say, yes, now here is a symbol, everybody should bow before it and love it? It doesn't quite happen like that. For the flag to be meaningful, you see that in sports stadiums. When people achieve something, they hold it forth, or, if it does something to you, it's because a long relationship has been elaborated, constructed, which is partly through protests, it could be through the way you have appropriated it yourself. So this appropriation is a very long process, and that's what I look into. It's full of tensions. It's not a smooth story. It creates friction. And that is what is interesting about the flag. Despite all those frictions and tensions and the multiplicity of meanings in the flag, people still relate to it. So that's the history I investigate.
And yet, before we come to the Tiranga and its various histories, didn't the Indian princely states also have their heralds? So the idea of a piece of cloth, the form is of a symbol which immediately establishes a connect between power and the ruled, was always there in India, wasn't it?
Sure. Flags didn't appear in modern times. They have been in the ancient periods. Banners of tribes, banners of communities, flags of monarchs. And this is a very familiar symbol to Indians as elsewhere. And as you say, princely kingdoms had their own flags. But these are flags of royal princes, right? And the colonial period is significant in this respect, because when India is transferred to the control of the crown, there's an attempt to reimagine and redefine these princely banners in a more European tradition. And here we have a very interesting figure called Robert Taylor, who's a civil servant in the Indian Administrative Service, and he's given the task of redesigning princely banners in India. And he sends off an inquiry. He contacted all the British residents in the various princely states and looked up books, Todd's memoirs, for example, to see what were these, what would the princes like to see in their banners. So in 1877, a revision of the princely banners is undertaken. And as a result of this inquiry, Robert Taylor comes to some conclusions. He notes that some colors are preferred by the Hindu princely kingdoms, and for example, red, saffron, pinks, etc., whereas green is preferred by the Muslim princely kingdom. This was not exactly true, but these are some schematic conclusions he draws, because sometimes red and green had been used for princely banners. But the other conclusion he draws is that there's no strong attachment or clarity about these princely banners. So he actually starts introducing elements from the geography or the mythology of these places and designs these princely banners, which are officially inaugurated in 1877. And
But therefore, is it correct to say that they are, in a sense, imposed by the colonial state?
Absolutely. Princely banners are defined and introduced by the British colonial government. And these banners will continue until 1947. But as I said, they are princely banners. So this relationship between the people, they owe fidelity to the prince. And in a way, there's a whole difference between a flag that is going to represent the nation and a small, the figure of the monarch or the prince.
So, one of the things that I read, that the British were the ones who broached the subject of a national flag, which represent colonial India as separate from princely India, mainly to emphasize imperial power when King Edward VII was to be crowned, and India as the biggest colony had to be represented. So the idea of the larger national flag is barely 120 years old, right?
Well, the British did not think of a national flag for India. They just were thinking about a symbol to represent their colony in the Union flag. Just like every other British dominion had its own symbol, so they thought of a symbol to characterize this huge Indian empire. The word national did not appear at this stage. But so the British were thinking in their own imperial tradition, but the Indians were not yet thinking about a national flag for themselves. They had another agenda in mind. This was a very practical agenda which turned around material improvement in their status of citizens and winning greater rights, opening up channels of employment, winning the right to present themselves in the Indian administrative examination. These were the issues that were preoccupying Indians, greater self-government. So the national flag is actually an idea that appears quite late. Let's say there had been some scattered references or searches in the late 19th century, but it's really in the early 20th century with the partition of Bengal that it really appears as a symbol of something wider, a possible nation in 1905. It's quite interesting because if you read Rabindranath Tagore's novel Gora, the Hindu Binoy asked Gora, you think of India all the time, it is in your mind and in your heart, but how do you see her? And Gora has no answer to that. And so this reflects really that, India needed something to represent her. Also that in this search to represent India, the nation, a lot of images are thrown up, religious images, mythical figures, Mother India. They have a certain success, but they do not cross religious boundaries and they do not unite everybody around secular idea of the nation.
Yeah, that's a word that we will keep aside for the time being. I'm going to come to that in a little bit. So what you're saying is that around that time, these thoughts were emerging in a lot of people's minds that we needed something that immediately, but the British were, I don't know whether it was simultaneously or whatever, pushing for an idea of the Dominion flag, which the Union Jack somewhere the corner, wasn't it? What is the controversy around that? Because there is a lot of mischievous messages going around to say that Gandhi wanted that flag, which is not true. But what was the Dominion flag with that Union Jack all about?
This was an imperial tradition, the Union flag with a symbol of the Dominion or the colony. This was the pattern. And even in 1917, when the Home Rule movement is gaining strength with Annie Besant and with Tilak, a flag is raised. And until the 1920s, there's a thinking about India means thinking about India within the imperial system. So having the Union flag somewhere and then having some symbol for India, either a lotus or an elephant or a banyan tree, these are images and symbols that are circulating. But it is after the Home Rule movement and after India's emergence as an autonomous colony heading towards self-government within the League of Nations that really attention is drawn to the need for a separate, distinctive symbol for India. So this is a very important post-World War, First World War moment, the League of Nations, where India is an actor on its own strength. This is a very paradoxical, curious situation because she's a colony. At the same time, she is participating as an independent member with its own voice in the League of Nations, partly because of demands from the Dominions, which had been supported by Woodrow Wilson, and also her participation and effort in the First World War. So here is India in an international platform where every dominion has its own flag, and then the Indian members say, well, we should have our own separate symbol. And it's voiced from several quarters. One of the princes, the Jam of Navanagar, he comes up with this idea as well. But the British are not at all keen to encourage this. They do not want to open a debate or discussions around the national symbol for India because they feel that's going to take them down the road, which they have already tread with some difficulty with Ireland, for example. And so they do not want to open this chapter at all. And therefore, it's on the Indian side that, a real interest begins to grow about the need for a symbol for a nation they want. And the rupture will come about in the 1920s.
Interesting, you should say Ireland, because the Indian flag does look like the Irish flag in some ways, except that they are vertical, we are horizontal, but the colors are the same. And there is, just touching upon this, there is a symbiotic relationship between Ireland and India at that time, their revolution and what is happening in India. So what you're saying is League of Nations sets up this thought process.
Yes.
Somewhere the three-colored flag appears. Is that the flag which has the charkha in the middle? But that's a Congress flag. So what appears around that time as to symbolize India?
So I think we should evoke 1917 here, 1916, 1970, context of the Home Rule movement. And here we have determined efforts being made by somebody from Andhra Pradesh, a person called Pingali Venkaya, who has been in the army. He's been to South Africa, military background, realizes the importance of banners and symbols, and sets about proposing designs for a possible national flag. So it's important to understand that this is not an idea that is developing uniquely and exclusively within the borders of one region or one party in India. It is the growth of the idea for a flag is the result of complex circulations. I talked about Ireland, but at the same, I talked about the importance of the League of Nations, but at the same time, other dominions were thinking about their own national flags. And Indians are not oblivious of these wider movements. South Africa, Canada, Australia are thinking about national flags of their own. Pingali Venkaya, for example, has been to South Africa. He has met Gandhi. Gandhi is struggling with his own ideas about, national identity, thought, and images. And Pingali Venkaya comes back to India and then produces a small booklet called The National Flag for India, where he proposes dozens of designs, possible designs for a national flag. Many of these designs have motives drawn from Indian legends, myth, epics. They're extremely religious, and they're within the imperial frame because there is always a union flag in the corner. And Venkaya is trying to convince the Congress Party, the Indian National Congress, to take up this. He wants the Indian National Congress to hold exhibitions. And one or two of his flags do make it to the annual Indian National Congress sessions, but it's never on the party agenda. So it's not a political subject. And these are efforts being made by individuals. It's interesting to note that in the early 20th century, non-Indians had been promoting the idea of a flag. Non-Indians, I mean Nivedita and Bikaji. Well, Bikaji Kama is a Parsi lady, but she's living in Europe. She hosts an Indian flag for the Indian nation in 1907 at the International Socialist Conference in Stuttgart. And so the flag is not it cannot be thought of as a party flag, but it will need the Indian National Congress as a huge party with a big organization to accompany it and to develop it as an idea. And so Pingali Venkaya keeps approaching Gandhi and urging him to launch a flag. And Gandhi is never convinced with his designs because he's looking for an element which he says will really shake the Indians. It will jar them into an immediate identification or provoke a strong feeling when they see this design. And in all of Pingali Venkaya's designs, Gandhi sees nothing. He sees a banyan tree, he sees an image of Arjun and Bhishma, and he's not convinced. And it is only when Lala Hansraj of Jalandhar suggests to Gandhi that, yes, why don't you put a charkha there, that Gandhi says, okay, this is it. Because the charkha is an element tool that Gandhi has been working with, as you know. When he came back from South Africa, the charkha was not a common object that was being used ordinarily by Indians. Gandhi set out to search for a model of the charkha. He finally found it, and then he develops it. He urges other people, encourages them, inspires them to use the charkha because it stands for much more than just spinning cloth. It's a political instrument. And therefore, this is a combination of two elements, an idea for a national flag for India, which Gandhi knows that it can inspire, everybody's familiar with the power of flags for the nation, and the charkha. But for him, the decisive click is combining the two. And so the original, it's called the Swaraj flag in 1920. It's red and green, and it's got a charkha in the middle. And Gandhi interprets this in the old colonial tradition I mentioned of colors representing groups, which had been forwarded by the British civil servant. And therefore, this is the beginning of, really fixing colors as belonging and incarnating communities, whereas this was not the tradition in India. Colors did not represent fixed, closed groups, or yes, they were used, but there was a very broad polysemic association and understanding of colors.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't know whether I can really connect it, but Gandhi was also preoccupied with the Khilafat movement around that time.
Absolutely.
So that could have played a role in his mind, and he bringing all communities together. I think there was some suggestion that the blue represented the Harijans or the Dalits as they came to be. So all that was, but later I think others, maybe Nehru also started suggesting that it possibly also represented other things like agriculture or, whatever. Am I right in interpreting that?
Well, the Khilafat movement naturally emphasizes the need for unity between the Hindus and the Muslims, and therefore these colors are also evoked as representing this unity. White is going to represent other people, everybody else. But then in the late 1920s and 30s, the Sikhs get a bit agitated, saying that, our color is not represented. And this sort of triggers and opens a debate on the flag colors as representing something more than simply groups of people, but as standing for qualities. And this is the shift in the beginning of a shift in how colors can be interpreted in a way that will draw the maximum number of people into identifying with this symbol and not excluding people.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Remember the days when our granny used to narrate once upon a time stories? Let's bring back the good old days of moral stories with Storytime Tamil. Hi, I am Ravishankar Balachandran, host of Storytime Tamil podcast. I would like you to entertain and educate your children with stories from Storytime Tamil. Tune in to the new episode sharp at 7 p.m. every day on IVM website, IVM podcast app, YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. So in 1947, July 1947, when it was finally adopted and the technical dimensions were introduced, the ratio of the height and the width, Pandit Nehru said in the Constituent Assembly, I'm sure many in this house will feel the glow and the warmth which I feel at the present moment, for behind this resolution and the flag which I have the honor to present to this house for adoption lies history, the concentrated history of a short span in a nation's existence. So, end quote. So the flag came to be the embodiment of the country, its past, its mythologies, and its struggle. Would you care to kind of amplify that for us about what Nehru meant and what the House understood and all of us have understood since?
Well, Nehru was convinced of one thing, that is, India's recent anti-colonial struggle had brought them together in a joint effort to force the British to exit from India. And this unity through a joint struggle had to be maintained. And the memory of that was very powerful. And Indians should remember that, rather than a very long history which could be divisive, which had set Indians against each other at some point or the other. But this was a moment that had brought them together. And the flag had been present in this long struggle. So it was actually deeply layered with memories of this struggle, whether it was the civil disobedience movement, whether it was before that non-cooperation or Quit India movement. So it evoked all these memories. It had been present, a kind of witness, but also an actor of these movements. And therefore, it could mean so many different things. It related to the experiences of people. It brought back a whole set of emotions or sentiments. And if you read people's stories at this time, often they say, I saw the tricolor and the effect it had on them. So these were years which had allowed people to relate to the flag in a very intimate way. And the Constituent Assembly provides an example. All the people who got up and talked about what it meant for them, from Sarojini Naidu, who evoked her anguish at not seeing the flag present in some of the international events she had participated in, commemorative events after the First World War. She talked about her anguish at not seeing a flag of India's at that time. Other people talked of what the flag meant in, either for the tribals, what it stand for, the ideals it evoked. So here is a moment when the flag's being invested by values and ideals. All the directive principles in the Constitution, they're not just a discourse on paper, but the flag stood for that. It was a very strong moment of coming together and acknowledging everything that had happened. After all, these people had, really spent their lives fighting for something. They were at the end of their lives. And here was a new beginning. And so the flag, in a way, you can imagine when they saw it hoisted and fluttering, it, brought back a life.
Arundhati, yet it had a slight, I don't want to overblow it, but it connects with a lot of what we're seeing today. It had a contentious element to it, in the sense that the small but vocal group of the RSS, the Hindutva elements, refused to recognize it, because they said that this is not representing India as they see it. So that thing was already beginning to happen at that time, because they said that they wanted a flag which has only saffron in it. So clearly that idea of colors representing people had not disappeared.
Well, the flag was never a completely unanimous symbol. As it is born and as it grows, it attracts reflection, discussion, debate, and we can think about it as a site of contestation, but we can think about it also as a site of political debate. And there was a lot of debate. I mentioned the Sikhs who in the late 1920s and the 1930s claimed that they did not feel themselves represented in the flag. There were other groups who did not feel represented in the flag, the Muslims. So just as the national flag was a response to the imperial flag, so too the national flag itself called for other responses. And, political parties at this time adopted their own flags. The RSS adopted, the Hindu Mahasabha adopted its flag in 1925. You had the Communist Party, red flag, which was the flag of the workers, all international workers movement. So debate was going on. And this debate took a very official form, because while I mentioned that the flag is present in the political struggle since the 1920s, even before, the official adoption of the national flag came about only in 1931. And this was the result of a public debate. A public debate was not a national referendum at this moment, because I think the British would have put their foot down on holding a national referendum. But it was a debate launched by the Indian National Congress to all its provincial branches, asking them whether they saw any defects in the national flag. Did they find the design appropriate, or could they make any suggestions? And this inquiry, which was sent forth, actually solicited a lot of responses and differences. And therefore, a flag committee was set up in, I think, May 1931 to consider all these different suggestions and ideas, and then officially propose a flag. And in these suggestions, there was a very strong demand for a saffron flag. And the Sikhs said they would be happy with the saffron flag. So it was not just a demand from a political party. It was a suggestion from various associations that had come to the Indian National Congress. Saffron was a very hugely acclaimed color. It had meaning for lots of people. And in fact, in the official discussions, Nehru also gave a decided preference for saffron. And the flag committee gave its opinion in favor of a uniquely saffron flag. But this raised such a furor that they said that this would be against the intentions of the national movement to divide people so bitterly and so strongly against each other. And besides, the tricolor had actually acquired a public image. It was very known, so a break at that point would not be advisable. And therefore, the tricolor is maintained with the charkha. And that is officially appointed. The moment of its official adoption is not just a coincidence, because Gandhi is going to the Roundtable Conference as the official representative of all of India. The Indian National Congress at that time has been receiving complains that this is just a party flag. This is not a national flag. So they're keen to adopt a flag officially as a flag for all of India, which then Gandhi can display in the roundtable conference in negotiations, whereas all the other members of the different communities who are there, whether it is the princes or the Sikhs or the Ambedkar, they go for this conference, but they do not have a flag for India. And that's a very important difference. So it shows you that parties have their own programs and their own agendas, which will develop and which will grow. But it's interesting to see that the flags become a site for political debate and discussions. And as I say in my book, it allows for a kind of experimentation in democracy and practicing democracy with debate. That means accepting contestation, accepting rejection, and dealing with it. And this is what happens in 1931. There's a complete awareness that the flag is not unanimously adored and loved. There are differences. Now, how do you go about creating something that is nationally meaningful in spite of those differences?
One can go on and on this. The fact remains that, I'm just mentioning this, that the Congress dominated the national stage in terms of representing the aspirations of this country. It had a uniquely, if I may even go as far as to say, stellar record of sacrifices and fights with the others and representations, etc., which neither of the others had. Certainly not the princely states, but certainly not the Muslim League or Ambedkar. And it had this powerful symbol of Gandhi. So, yet it decided not to impose its views, but to have this ground-up debate, which is fascinating because it had this countrywide reach. But keeping that aside, the thing is, what I was getting at is, if there were these 4 or 5 constituencies not happy with the Indian flag, the communists, the Sikhs, etc., yet the fact remains that the post-independence, post-1947, the others, of course, every trade union displays a red flag, but the trade unions are not going to say, we don't accept this anymore. And nor are the Sikhs going to say. They fight under the flag in the military or anywhere else, and they play cricket under the flag. Yet the RSS, which has grown in strength, has refused to fly it at their headquarters or anywhere else for 52 years. And even now, this is trivial, but while there is talk about using it as a symbol on your Twitter account or whatever, the RSS is showing very, very limited interest in this. So do you think that that strong word, but antipathy towards this idea, which you say has been discussed and over-discussed, that it's not just a community representation, this antipathy to the idea has been carried this far, and it really is hostility, or what?
Since the 1920s, the RSS had in its headquarters, its own flag was raised and separately, but not in the public space. And initially, there were only branches for women, so it wasn't even open for women until 1936. Yes, hostility may have, it depending on the moment, it can be developed, it can be taken to different heights. But as I said, a national flag, although it has all the support and legitimization by the state behind it, and there are laws that do not allow disrespect, etc., for the flag. Contestations will always be present, and that's the way it is.
Of course, contestation is part of democracy. The irony I was trying to connect it with is that the present political establishment in the country, which is steeped in the RSS tradition for the last X number of years. The prime minister certainly is, his ministers too are now suggesting that every householder wave the flag. So at the very least, there is an irony, at the very least. But if you want to carry it, sorry?
Yes, I was saying, har ghar, har tiranga.
So there, at the very least, no. Just as I just wanted to get to this idea, which I'm very keen to get your views. There is irony there, but let's keep irony aside, because now, after all, Mr. Modi is the prime minister, so he respects the idea of Tiranga or whatever, and he also understands the collective moment of nationalism. But to then evoke this as a symbol of nationalist pride, change the laws about the use of fabric, or till now we were not allowed to display the flag in our homes publicly. All this done rapidly. So where do you see this symbol heading? And is it going to be now just, another casual symbol of showing, oh, I'm a patriot or a nationalist? Or what do you see it coming out as? I was just thinking, for example, we won't go too far on this point, that what happens after the 16th of August with all these millions of flags that have been given to people's homes? So where do you see this symbol and symbolism going from?
2004, when Naveen Jindal sort of took the case to court against the Union of India for the right for every citizen to display the flag. This was a right that was not accorded before, from 1947 till that date. I thought this is a very interesting moment. It heralds a democratization of the flag as it exists in countries like the United States, where there's a very strong flag culture, in the United Kingdom as well, where there's a very relaxed attitude towards the flag, despite the fact that it's a highly patriotic symbol. But there are no draconian laws against it. You can have the flag on your on a paper bag, or on your satchel, or on a coffee mug. So I thought this is an interesting moment after 2004, and you do see that there's been a liberalization after a very bureaucratic regime in which the flag was enclosed. It's opened up the flag to all kinds of uses, and you've seen many of these uses. But there's also been a kind of a commodification of the flag, which has been possible, globally. It appears in all kinds of situations, as clothes, as, on food packets, etc. So where is this commodification and this liberalization going to lead us? Currently, we see there is a passion for monumental flags. They're going up all over the country. And there's practically a rivalry. Who is going to have the highest flagpole, and who is going to have the largest flag? So what I've learned as a historian is to look at these events and these moments in a longer term. So obviously, we're not astrologers, but it's a moment. We have a particular government in power. We have a strong emphasis on patriotism and on proving patriotism. At the same time, India has strong democratic foundations, a strong democratic culture, and it's a country which has really multiple forces. And so I'm sure there's an official policy. 15th of August, we'll see a profusion of flags. That's an official policy. Now, after that, it's open for use, for imagining, for assimilating and appropriating. So this is all open. We can't say by 2035, the flag will have become an essential feature in everybody's domestic space. It's really, in people's hands. We see just now that it's being used for very nationalist purposes, but at the same time, it's open for citizen affirmation. So it has this potential. The official potential is clear, but the citizen potential has yet to be defined and elaborated. And so this moment is critical.
So that was a very interesting point you made about the citizens' potential is unknown. And in our experience in the last few years, and even in the years before, this government, it is our experience that there is a fair amount of enthusiasm for many initiatives, which often, not always, but often then slip into your daily routine, and then you get on with your life. Because, for example, there's this clip going around where this guy says, I went to buy some food and I had some little bit of money. And the guy sitting at the ration shop said, first, you've got to buy a 20 rupee flag, and only then will I give you your food or your rations. Where do I get? It's a small clip for about 30 seconds, but it's kind of started moving around and all that kind of thing. So you're right about democratic traditions. You're also right, this is not part of that, but you're also right in general, and it's part of our daily experience, that this country has a whole range of layers which we cannot even begin to imagine. While there may be great acceptance to this idea for a little while, people really in India, elsewhere too, want to get on with their lives and to say, yeah, great. Some of us will keep the flag. Some of us will look at our neighbors and say, why are you keeping the flag? It's over. And life will go on. And if somebody wants to keep it, great. If somebody doesn't want to, there was a moment in the last few years when we were very angry with China when people threw their Chinese-made television sets on the ground. Now they must be looking very, very foolish because they spent a lot of money and broke television sets. So all that will happen. But what I found was that irony of connecting an organization which has never put it up with a person who is telling us to put it up. And, irony is in modern India at the moment, I think we can go on and on. But it's interesting that you say that the secular aspect of the flag is up for debate, and which is really essentially a good thing in a democratic society, that contestations must and should happen. And otherwise, if you're going to, I find the British attitude, the frivolous attitude towards all national symbols quite endearing, because while the Americans take everything very seriously, and in France, I can't speak because I haven't lived there, but it's perhaps a little bit of everything, because they don't like anything that becomes hyper-nationalistic or hyper-religious, for example, because they're so proud of their secular credentials. So each country has its own processes and cultures and traditions. But to wind up, what shall we say about the future of the Tiranga? It's a provocative question, and perhaps it has no place in this discussion. But do we think that the Tiranga as we know it has a future?
Well, I think as long as nations...
You're welcome to say that that's a ridiculous question and I can't answer it. You're welcome. I just threw it in because coming from where you have, I thought this was something that was worth throwing up in the air.
Well, Sidharth, I think that as long as there are nations, there are going to be national flags. And we've seen, looking at it from a European position, or you see what happened in the United States after the attacks on the 2011, there's been a frenzy around the flag. French houses, they have a little place on the facade of the house to put the flag. And this is a very strong tradition. Still, if you go around France, many of the houses have this, people hoist flags. Now they might be hoisting the Ukrainian flag at the moment and different kinds of flags. But there used to be a kind of as a joke saying a nation needs three things. It needs a currency, it needs an airline. That's not so much true now, although they try to have that still, and it needs a flag. The future of the Tiranga is, in a way, the future of the national flag. It's linked to the future of the nation. It's linked to the nation. And I don't think that, at some point we'll say, okay, nations don't need flags. We can replace it with.
May I interrupt you, Arundhati? My question was very pointed. Is this particular flag, with everything that its history suggests and the general sense of what it stands for suggests, even though there have been attempts to say this is nothing to do with that, it's something broader, is this going to remain with us? Because it's got saffron, it's got blue, it's got green. So is this the way things are? Will we see? Nations do have different flags, throughout their history.
Yes, there could be. We can't rule out the possibility of introducing a change, a radical change. But that would be linked to many other developments. As I sort of, if you look at the history of the flag and any, just changing it autocratically and suddenly would imply a breakdown between a national ethos and a government. And so that's a risky project. Now, your fears about a brutal radical change are not groundless. But I think there are consequences, and that's why it's interesting to look at the history of this flag and look at the different deaths and the different moments to see what is better avoidable.
Arundhati Virmani, that was really something that we see all around us. We understand its sentimental value. Some of us may even know a little bit about its value to us as a people and the ethos that it comes from. But this level of historical perspective is unique. Thank you so much. I hope to get your book one day and delve into the entire history. It was really fascinating to read about so many aspects that you mentioned. It will be fascinating to know about the princes, about the debates, about the 1931 adoption of a resolution of the flag after a long debate among Congress, members of the Congress, where everyone threw their opinions, offered their opinions. And it's not as simple as we think it is, because the flag is the flag. And I think it's embedded in our DNA at the moment. So thank you once again. That was Arundhati Virmani, professor in France, who has written what I consider the ultimate history of the Indian national flag. We'll be back again next week with another guest. This particular debate is perfect for August 15th, 2022, as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of India's independence. But we'll be back again with another guest next week. Till then, goodbye. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hello. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Simplified, the hosts uncover reasons behind legendary music artists selling their catalogs for insane sums of money. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam talks to Arun Chaudhary. He's the Director and Chief Business Officer of N-Stock by Mirai Assets. They discuss how the platform enables users to trade in shares with zero brokerage. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk highlight the preventions necessary to be taken in order to curtail monkeypox. On The Habit Coach, Ashton shares how one can navigate through their anger and the best ways to deal with it. And on Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Shreyas, Antariksha and myself are amused by Balenciaga's trash pouch, which is worth 1.4 lakh rupees. Once again, would like to remind you all about our merch. There's some amazing stuff out there. Please go to our website, ivmpodcast.com, click on the shop tab, and do check out what's available there. I'm sure you'll find something you like. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And also, I'd like to remind you all to please tell a friend about this show if you're enjoying it. It will give you somebody to talk to the show about. Yeah, it really does help us too, so that too. Also, please rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on, and you can check us out on YouTube. We have a page on our website which basically lists all our YouTube channels. Please go check that out. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Boat Lifestyle, Small Case, and Intel vPro. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Sidharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.